There's a virus out there that's so perfectly evolved, it literally rewires the brain of its host. It compels it to attack, to bite, to do one thing and one thing only: spread. It's a virus that, once it shows itself, gives you a 99.9% chance of death. And this isn't science fiction. This is rabies. For one of the world's oldest and most feared diseases, that statement, it's not an exaggeration. It is the cold, hard medical reality. The moment the classic signs of rabies appear, the countdown has already hit 0. So what actually happens in that final awful stage? Well, the symptoms are truly the stuff of nightmares. And it all starts with one of the most cruel and unusual conditions in all of medicine. Okay, try to imagine this. You are desperately thirsty. Your body is screaming for water. But every single time you try to take a sip, your own throat violently seizes up in these agonizing spasms. That is hydrophobia. See, in its own parasitic genius, the virus wants to keep the saliva in your mouth totally pure, totally undiluted, ready to be passed on. So it makes the one thing you need to survive a source of absolute torture. And the horror doesn't stop with water. Victims can develop something called aerophobia, where even a simple breeze, a draft of air, can trigger those exact same spasms. You add to that this intense aggression, extreme sensitivity to light and sound, and as we're about to see, the virus's attack on the brain leads to even more bizarre behaviors that you definitely don't see in the horror movies. To really understand these symptoms, you have to follow the virus on its journey, because it's not just killing its host, it's piloting it. So, from the moment of a bite, the virus begins this slow, methodical climb up the nervous system. It's like a hijacker sneaking into the cockpit of a plane. It completely avoids the bloodstream, so it stays hidden from the immune system. And once it reaches the brain, boom, it seizes control, it rewires behavior, turning the host into the perfect vehicle for its own spread, before it travels back down into the salivary glands for that final violent transmission. And this is the crucial point. The rage, the biting, it isn't random badness. No, it's a calculated evolutionary strategy. The virus literally transforms its victim into a weapon to ensure its own lineage continues. It is a parasite's perfect crime. And this is where the hijacking gets truly, truly bizarre. A clinical review found that in over 83% of these reviewed cases, the first symptom wasn't aggression or hydrophobia. It was abnormal sexual behaviors, like priapism and frequent ejaculation. It's just a devastating detail because it so often leads to a misdiagnosis until the more infamous, and by then fatal, symptoms finally show up. So, with this horrifying loss of control, this monstrous transformation, you have to wonder, how did our ancestors make sense of all this, before they had any concept of what a virus even was? Well, picture this. It's the 18th century, and Europe is gripped by what historians now call the Great Vampire Epidemic. People were dying from this mysterious illness, and when bodies were exhumed, they sometimes looked disturbingly lifelike. This panic wasn't just superstition. It was fueled by real diseases they couldn't explain, and a major culprit was rabies, often spread by wolf bites. And this just brilliantly illustrates the connection. I mean, the parallels are uncanny. It's transmitted by a bite, monsters are created by a bite, it causes aggression and loss of control, werewolves are savage and uncontrollable, aversion to water becomes repulsion by holy water, hypersensitivity to light and smells becomes an aversion to sunlight and garlic. And the link to rabid dogs and wolves, well, that becomes the werewolf's transformation. Our most enduring monsters weren't just born from imagination. They were eyewitness accounts of our real-world disease. And that's really the heart of it. The virus's ability to just strip away a person's reason, their humanity, their self-control. It was so profound that our ancestors could only explain it as a supernatural, monstrous transformation. The beast wasn't a metaphor. It was a symptom. These ancient fears, of disease corrupting the body and mind from the inside out, they never really left us. They've just evolved, finding new and terrifying ways to express themselves in modern horror. And a perfect example is director David Cronenberg's 1977 body horror film, Rabid. In it, a woman has experimental surgery and develops this grotesque new organ in her armpit, along with an insatiable thirst for blood. She becomes a new kind of vector, spreading a super rabies that turns the entire city of Montreal into a quarantine zone. What Cronenberg does so masterfully is blend everything we've been talking about. You've got the vampiric need for blood, the zombie-like spread of infection, and his signature body horror, this terrifying idea that your own flesh can betray you and mutate into something monstrous. I mean, listen to this description. It really gets to the heart of the film's shocking power. It mashes up sexuality, disease, and body transformation into this unforgettable, deeply unsettling nightmare. It just goes to show that the core horrors of rabies are still incredibly potent fuel for our fears today. Okay, so from myths and movies, let's bring it back to the grim reality. If a vaccine isn't given in time and the symptoms start to show, is there any hope at all? I want you to just let that number sink in. 30. Not 30 per year. We're talking roughly 30 ever. Out of the countless millions who have died from this disease throughout history, the number of people who have survived after symptoms begin is so small it's almost zero. But back in 2004, doctors tried a desperate, radical idea: the Milwaukee Protocol. The theory goes like this. Rabies doesn't actually destroy the brain, it just causes a fatal dysfunction. So, what if you could put the brain in a coma, basically shut it down to protect it from itself, and just give the immune system a fighting chance to clear the virus? And that is exactly what doctors did for Jonna Geese, a teenager who was bitten by a bat. She became the first person in history to survive symptomatic rabies without a vaccine. But it wasn't a magic bullet. Her recovery was grueling. She had to completely relearn how to walk, talk, eat, showing the immense toll the virus takes, even when it's beaten. And this chart, well, it shows the heartbreaking reality. Since that first success, the protocol has been tried dozens of times. And while it has saved a handful of lives, Gina Geese is still the only unvaccinated person to have ever survived with it. And this, as you can imagine, has created a fierce debate. Is the protocol a false hope, a red herring that just distracts from how important vaccination is? Or, when you're facing a disease that is, for all intents and purposes, a 100% death sentence, is any chance, no matter how slim, a chance worth taking? Which leaves us with one final thought. We created werewolves and vampires to try and make sense of the horror. But when you look at the cold, biological facts, the hijacking of the brain, the agonizing symptoms, and the near absolute certainty of death, you have to ask, is the real-life virus infinitely more terrifying than any monster we could ever possibly invent?